Yeah, because I've been known to do that. Okay, if everybody's ready, I'd say we're going to go ahead and start. I would like to welcome everybody to the Forage webinar series with the I-29 group, as well as the Northern Plains Forage Association. We started this just a couple of months ago, and we're kind of excited uh, that we have a pretty good following for today, we're going to start with Dr. Martinson. She's professor of extension program with University of Minnesota, and she's going to give us some insights that every hay producer and livestock owner can use. She'll be discussing how rates affect ash content, why baling moisture matters for mold prevention, and how wraps influence forage quality, as well as talk to us a little bit about the feeders, especially feeding horses. So as I always say, Dr. Martinson, the podium is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Fred, and thank you for having me. And I'm glad to kick it off today. So, just a quick outline of what we're going to talk about, although Fred did a great job of talking about that. And I should pause for a second. Everyone can hear and see okay? Thumbs up. Yeah. All right. So a lot of times when we talk about hay characteristics, we talk about how species can drive quality, the maturity, and a lot of times when we're dealing with animals, especially horses, touch, smell, uh, color is a sales characteristic. It doesn't really indicate quality always. Weeds and dust and mold. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. What I do want to share is some of the research that we have done over maybe the last decade that kind of feeds into some of this and really helps tell the story of why some of these things are important, but also why just the process of haymaking itself can really impact a lot of hay characteristics and hay quality. So the first thing I want to talk about is hay raking. I kind of think about going through the hay making process. You're cutting it, and there's a lot of great information on cutting, but also raking. Uh, I don't know how your hay season has been, but I'm up here in Minnesota, and I can tell you we have not had more than 3 days without rain. In those days we haven't had rain, we've had high humidity. So it has been, in my opinion, a really, really challenging hay production season so far, at least in Minnesota. The weather has been great for pastures and corn, but the trade-off has been in hay. So a project we did several years ago really looked at the impact of hay rake and ash. Now, ash is a mineral content of forage, but there's endogenous, which is a naturally occurring minerals, and then there is the exogenous, which is sort of the soil and the silica. And if you look at just alfalfa hay across, the board, those endogenous or those minerals is about 8%. And even with the best management, you obviously can't avoid soil and silica. That's about 4%. And you can just see this blue tarp in the upper right just shows some of that ash content. And if you're feeding hay in feeders, you can frequently see that. And then the lower right is just some averages from a forage testing laboratory. And you can see min, average, and max, and that max is 18%. And at 18%, if you do the calculations, that is 1 pound of dirt you are potentially feeding for every 10 pounds fed of hay at 18% ash. So when we were looking at this, we were like, okay, especially on sandy soils. And even though I'm a horse specialist, I'm trained as an agronomist to do a lot of work also with beef cattle. I grew up on a dairy farm. We have beef cattle, so I kind of have a feel for the whole gamut of things. And it's a little bit, it's just, it, the amount of ash in the hay really matters. So we looked at three rakes and a merger. Upper right, if you can see my cursor is a ground driven reel rake. Over here on the right is a roller bar rake. We had a rotary rake, and then of course we had a merger. And you can see we had this nice long alfalfa field. We just divvied up the rows, raked them, baled them, and measured ash. We did this in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and also in Pennsylvania. This was a large research project. And what we found, so here this table is the merger, the side delivery, the rotary rake, and the wheel rake. The alfalfa standing was about 11%. After you cut it, obviously you're going to introduce a little bit of that soil and silica into it, was about 13%. And then you can see there was a difference. So the numbers here listed, if they have a different letter, it means that statistically they are different. So the merger resulted in less ash than the other rakes. And this kind of makes sense. So then after we baled it, we measured the ash again. And you can see this time the wheel rake had more ash compared to the merger. So we know things that, so I mean, it kind of confirmed what we were thinking. And it really just helps us with equipment settings and just making people aware that the rake that they use can impact the amount of ash that ends up in the hay. So as we move through the baling process, we now want to look at moisture at baling. And it sounds like Fred is going to share some stories at the end. But this year, moisture at baling has really been a hot button issue because it's been so challenging to dry down hay intended for baling. So a couple of years ago, we used these handy dandy little hobo moisture sensors and heat sensors. And if you core a bale, it turns out that these little sensors can be pushed into the hole. You can plug the hole and you get the sensors into you get them into the round bales and it can record this data, over time. So we want to look at the relationship between moisture at the time of baling and a temperature and the presence and type of mold. And this project really strung up because people would not believe me when I said that moisture at the time of baling is the main influence on mold formation. And so sometimes you have to do a project to showcase what you're talking about. So what we did is we baled round bales intentionally at different moistures. And this is a little bit easier to do these days with the technology that's out there for moisture sensors, especially the moisture sensors on the balers. So this table here we had hay that was relatively dry. It was 17% or less in the red. The blue line was hay that was baled between 20 and 25%, and no propionic acid was added. We then had bales that were baled quite wet, 30 to 35%. We then had hay that was baled and wrapped, that is the black line. And then the gray line is the air temperature. And you can see that this is for 50 days after baling. And what we found is that obviously the warmer, the higher the moisture at the time of baling, the more heat that is produced. And you can see this is one of those bales that were 30 to 35%. We actually had to use a chainsaw to remove the moisture sensors. And you can see all of the burning and the heat. These bales were stored outside. They were stored in an individual row. We didn't have any fire, but you can see how hot those bales got. Now, when you look at mold formation, there's information that's been around from Penn State forever, and was really meant for beef for I think it was built for dairy cattle. So mold counts are in colony forming units per gram, and everything has mold. The room you're sitting in, you can't have something with zero mold. It just isn't possible. So anything with less than 500,000 colony forming units per gram, even though that number sounds high, it isn't. That's a relatively low risk, or that's a very low risk. Anything up to 1 million is relatively safe. When you get over 1 million, there's a couple different categories. Feed with caution, closely observe animals. You can dilute it. It's easier if you're doing a total mixed ration. In my case, horse owners don't really do that. And then it's a do not feed. Because horses are really sensitive, for example, we don't want any forage less, any hay less than 500,000, where I know cattle folks are more comfortable going up to 1 million. So when we looked at our colony forming units in the different bales, we could just do that at the end of that 50-day window with just sampling. Here is the bale moisture. We had some that we were able to bale dry, and even that 12% bale moisture, the max temp got up to about 115 degrees, and these were 4x5 round bales that were just under 1,000 pounds on average. So they're pretty tightly packed, a fairly newer baler. 17% moisture was sort of the perfect environment. Look at the mold that formed. It was just moist enough where that mold could really take off. Where when you get into the higher moistures, those maximum temps that we observed actually resulted in a lower mold count only because some of them died off. It was just too hot inside those bales. And then, of course, our wrapped hay, we know that that works well, and we had the lower mold counts as well. So, really, the take home message was we've always said that round bales should be 15% moisture or less to really reduce the potential of molding. And I think that we are also just trying to debunk the wives' tale that round bales are all bad. Well, round bales just have a really narrow moisture window so that they don't have mold formation, where you just have a larger window with small square bales because you have less forage mass. So it just sort of helped us reinforce the importance of moisture at the time of baling and how that really impacts mold counts. So we've baled the hay. The other thing we started looking into is we have developed a really good relationship with some of the equipment manufacturers, and they're always releasing new products. So the one thing they were really interested in is testing some of these new products against twine and net wrap, especially in outdoor storage. I think we can all agree that building costs are very expensive, interest rates are very expensive, so not a lot of people can afford to put their hay under cover. So, are there other things we can do to really reduce the amount of waste we have when hay is stored outdoors? So, we know if we have twine bales, depending on how they're stored, we can have 12 to 35% dry matter loss, where net wrap has improved that, and usually we have about 7 to 11%. And those higher values of like that 35% with twine, that's maybe it's in a low area, it's under trees, something that doesn't allow the moisture to evaporate from that bale. So one of the equipment manufacturers came out with a new product called B-Wrap. And they was kind of promoted as, the shed without the shed. The problem was it came with a hefty price tag. So twine, this was a couple of years ago. These could be a little bit off. It was about $1 bale at the time of our research, net wrap about $1.17, and the B wrap had a pretty hefty price tag of about $8.33 per bag or per bale. But the question is, was it worth it? Well, the first thing we looked at is the time. And I can tell you if you're trying to bale a lot of hay, twine is challenging. So every time the baler kicked out a bale, and again we did tons of bales. Same fields, again going up and down alternate rows that were assigned to either net wrap, B wrap, or twine, and all of these can be done on the same baler. You can see per bale, the average was 18 seconds for net wrap. I think that's why farmers like it. We can clip right along. B wrap was 28 seconds, and the twine was almost a minute. And if you look at that over 250 bales, the time it will take you to wrap, you can see the huge time. And if you have rain coming, cattle to feed, family events to go to, you can see where time is definitely money in this case. So the other thing we wanted to look at is this is the forage quality of the hay on day 0, so the day it was harvested. We wanted to store it for 1 year, thinking that's probably the longest people are going to store, or mostly kind of the longest time people would store the hay. So you can see there wasn't really any differences. Yes, this is the same alfalfa grass hay from the same field, but again, it's going to bounce around a little bit. Now, after 360 days in storage, what we could see is that the non-structural carbohydrates, the NSC, which is water soluble, is going to be a little bit lower in twine and the net wrap simply because it just shows a little bit of weathering. When we look at the fiber components, NDF, neutral detergent fiber, ADF, acid detergent fiber, you can see a little bit of differences. And then, of course, with the NDFD 48, you can also see some differences. So we know that the B wrap is helping to maintain the forage quality after a year in storage, but there's a big price difference. So how does that relate? Is it really worth it? Before I show you the economics, we did look at dry matter loss, and how we calculated this is every 3 months we weighed and cored the bales in the field. And they were randomly assigned to a long row on pallets. And we had to use pallets because in Minnesota the ground freezes, and if you've ever dealt with frozen net wrap on the ground, you will do anything to avoid that. So we had about 7% loss with twine. Again, stored on pallets in a a well-drained area out in the open. The net wrap was 5% and the B wrap we didn't have any. Um, so looking at the economics, here's our bale value, and we just used the forage quality analysis and took some economics from a quality tested hay auction in Minnesota. So here you can see harvest and then our 30-day increments out until a year. This black line is the B wrap, the gold line is a net wrap, and the maroon line is a twine. Interestingly enough, if you're going to feed the hay within 90 days, doesn't matter what you use, it's the same. But if you are going to store that hay outdoors for more than 90 days, it actually pays to use the more expensive B wrap in this case. So, some takeaways from this is be strategic. If you know you're going to have some hay, that's going to be the last hay that you fed, that is going to be fed out in the spring. Maybe it's hay that's set aside for when the beef cows are calving or whatever the case. Maybe that's a situation where you would use B wrap. And the rest of it, if you're feeding all of your hay within 90 days, you can do whatever. So the other thing we did is we stored this hay for 90 days, and then we really wanted to see if any of the mold, we did see differences in mold. We wanted to know if the cattle could sense any of that. So we had 20 fall calving Black Angus cow calf pairs that we fed this to, and this was mostly alfalfa. You can see here the cattle were very, very happy to participate in this study. So we had the three types of forage, the net wrap, B wrap, and the twine. We rotated where the feeders were placed in the cattle feeding area. We welded bottoms on these round bale feeders so we could weigh them every day to measure forage disappearance and to clean up. We also cleaned up the area to account for any waste, but we are really looking at forage disappearance for the herd. So first of all, if you look at colony forming units of mold, this is a little bit of a different scale, but the black dashed line is the important part. That is our 1 million colony forming units of mold kind of cut off we don't have to worry about the forage. So you can see we have twine, net wrap, and B wrap. The mold is in the maroon bars, and then we also measured yeast. And if any of you have ever dealt with wrapped hay or hay that's under a tarp, sometimes that white film that you can see is kind of a yeast. It's kind of hard to know what to do with that, but we measured it. And you can see the twine was higher and the net wrap was higher in mold than the B wrap. But our forage quality kind of indicated that this was happening. So when we looked at the cattle, again, every 2 days, a new set of bales were fed, they were rotated, and you can see within the first 24 hours, this is pounds of dry matter intake per cow. You can see they love the B wrap, right? It was about 17 pounds per cow. Of course, after they ate the good stuff, then they had no problem eating the net wrap and twine. So really that 24 to 48, that day two, there was no difference. But then at the end, you can see that the cattle did eat more net wrap than twine, or I'm sorry, more bee wrap than twine, and the net wrap bales were in the middle. So the cattle did display a preference, and interestingly enough, we could correlate that the mold counts were negatively associated with dry matter intake. We've done a lot of horse preference work, some beef cattle preference work, and it is important to know that preference is only exhibited when the animals have a choice. It doesn't mean they won't eat hay that's wrapped in twine. It just means when given the choice, they really like the better quality beet wrap. And Fred has assured me I'm staying on after. We can answer questions. I'm not really paying attention to the chat, but I will look at that when I'm done and I'll try to answer any questions. But again, I'm happy to stay on and go through any questions that you have. So really, you know, the take home of all this is that the B-Rat bales maintain dry matter, forage quality when it's stored outdoors. It had less mold growth and greater cattle dry matter intake compared to twine compared to twine rat bales, and net wrap was in the middle of both. But if any of you have ever watched cattle, this is a perfect picture. They take that top crust, they flick it off, and then they eat what's left. So the final thing I'm going to cover is just, we've kind of been through the process, right? We've talked about the work we've done with looking at hay rakes, with looking at baling and moisture time of baling, the different wraps. And now let's talk just briefly about feeding hay. So one of probably the most work I have ever done as a researcher is this round bale feeder study. Nobody had ever done it with horses. They had done a smaller study with beef cattle, and no one has done it since because I'm telling you, there's lots of tears when it comes to this project. So much work. So what we did is we looked at 9 round bale feeders and a no feeder control. Um, these are all the different feeders. And essentially, we had pens of horses and they rotated through all of these feeders. Every day, we'd rake up the waste. We would obviously have to dry it because there's environmental moisture, there's moisture from the urine and feces of the horses. Um, and we had to weigh everything. We weighed the horses as they rotated. So again, just an incredibly labor intensive, but a really great project to give people information to just use data to select the feeder they wanted. So what we found is there was a huge difference in feeders. The wasteless feeder and that net. So I'll maybe just point out, I'll go back. This is the wasteless feeder. It had these little bars that you could pull a pin and gravity just kind of set it on. So you can see the horses were restricted. Here, the hay nets. Hay nets are now commonly used in the horse industry. They're quite popular. Down here, we have all the round feeders that are commonly used, right? A cone feeder, a ring feeder. This is the tombstone feeder, the tombstone saver. Um, this is the hay hut. It looks like a kid's playhouse with little openings cut in. And then these are two of the kind of the ring or the basket feeders, if you will, and the basket feeder kind of with a roof on it. So that are not basket cradle, whatever you want to call it. But here you can see that wasteless feeder and that net were our most efficient feeders. But the number I want you to pay attention to is that no feeder control. When we did not use a hay feeder, the horses wasted 57%. I had people tell me they can't afford to buy a feeder. I would argue they can't afford to not have a feeder. This is the cost of the feeders at the time of the study. And then we also did economics with hay at $200 per ton. I know that number jumps all around, and I think Jorge is going to give us a good overview on what that number might currently look like. But at the time of the study, that's what hay was in Minnesota. I'm not saying that's what it was throughout the US. And you can see all of these feeders, even the one that was most expensive, paid for themselves within 10 months. That project really garnered a lot of attention in the horse industry. We then followed up looking at some small square bale feeders. You can see the differences here. This is kind of a basket feeder. This was a portagrazer. This little lid, actually, this little grate goes on top of the hay, but inside of that and kind of sinks down as the horses eat. And then this is the very standard kind of rack and trough feeder. We did the same thing, had the horses rotated. We, of course, always have a no feeder control. And when you're feeding small square bales, instead of putting out a 1,000 pound round bale, you usually feed about 2% of the horse's body weight. So a 1,000 pound horse, that's 20. If you have a horse, you have a herd of 5 horses, that's 100 pounds, a day that you're feeding. So even with these feeders, you can see we had anywhere from 1 to 5%. The no feeder control, even though we were control feeding, was still 13% waste. Here are the prices of those feeders at the time of the study. And even these smaller value, these smaller price feeders, even with these relatively small amounts of hay waste, when you compare it to hay this time at $250 a ton, you can still, they all paid for themselves within a year of the study or within a year of owning the feeder. So all of this, the feeder work we have done over the years, feeder design does really impact hay waste and economics. All feeders resulted in significantly less waste compared to the no feeder controls, and every feeder paid for themselves within 1 year of time. So the overall, excuse me, the overall conclusions that we have found is, and again, sometimes you might be thinking, well, of course, this is common sense, but doing the research really helps us put numbers and economics to some of these commonly held beliefs or even things that we've assumed for years. So hay rake impacts ash content. The merger had less ash than things that were ground driven, like the wheel rake. Again, it makes sense. Moisture at time of baling is the main impact of mold formation. The new product B-Wrap really did maintain forage quality, and the cattle had a greater amount of dry matter intake when given a choice. We know that feeder design impacts hay waste, and all of these feeders paid for themselves within a year. So you're wondering what's next? I think next week we are starting a new project looking at different types of tarps and long-term storage. So essentially the wrap type study that we've done, but looking at different tarps. So this hay will be net wrapped, stored under a Protextia tarp, which is a breathable tarp, recycled billboards, which are just like the recycled billboards along the interstate. Those traditional blue tarps you can get at any, home store. And then we'll have a positive control of storing hay indoors, and then a negative control of storing hay outdoors uncovered. And once again, we will be feeding it to beef cattle. We know there's going to be some differences in mold, or we assume. So we're going to look at preference and also some reproductive efficiencies if we are lucky enough. So with that, this work takes a lot of funding and a lot of graduate students to help. So here's the funding that has funded all the projects that I've talked about. And then the 3 graduate students that did their master's and or PhD on these projects. So with that, Fred, my time is out. I will stay on. I will look in the chat and answer any questions, and then stay on to the very end and answer questions at the end as well. So thank you very much. Jorge, I think I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll start without Fred, and Fred, he can jump in whenever he he wants let me share my screen. We are, where were we? Give me a second, guys. It's been a while since I've been on Zoom. Good. Give it a second to blow up here. No, not this one. Play. See if it does this. There we go. Okay. My name is Jorge Carrillo. I'm with USDA Market News. I've been with Market News since 2021. I cover normally the California hay report, also now the Texas direct hay report. I helped start a couple auction or hay auctions in Iowa, South Dakota. Um, Maybe starting new hay report in Nevada. We'll see that. That's to be seen. But let me start. I'll show you what I got, what I do on a normal week to week hay for hay prices. Go. There we go. Okay, so I'll give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the classes of hay, the hay testing, the hay quality designations, and the reporting methods. Okay, and we'll start with alfalfa. Alfalfa has a couple classes, and I mean, as far as quality, we got grass hays, you got your Timothys, you got your orchards, Sudan, tough grasses. Here we go. Common grass hays. So most of these orchard Timothy fescue grasses are in the northern intermountains or northern states. In the southern states, we got Bermuda, Klein, Sudan, and teff grasses. They tend to mix these grasses because certain uh, horse people like to have a different diet for their horses. Oh, also, there is grain haze. You got your wheat, rye, oats, barleys, etc. Also native grasses. There's local grass, peargrass, meadowgrass. You got your different blends of alfalfa, grass, silage and baleage. Big in volume. When I report silage, I can report from as little as 3,000 tons to 12,000 tons per contact. Straw is another one that's used for bedding, erosion. Right now they're using Bermuda straw in dairy, grinding it up and mixing it into with canola, making bigger rations to extend their forage. Hay testing. I usually ask our contacts if they test their hay. If they test their hay is good. There is a couple of deals that we look for. Usually they focus on the protein because that is more of the total and what dairies and exporters are looking for. Here are the quality designations. So like I was talking about, the crude protein, the one on the right, is usually what they give me, but they'll also report the TDN, total nutrition, and also some RFB. Here's that RFB that they normally report. crude protein. Dry matter and moisture, they can test for the percentage. I don't really focus on that. I usually focus on the quality of the hay, where I can place the hay for pricing. Protein, that'll give me if it's supreme, premium, good, fair, utility. Same thing with the um, NDF. And I'm going to go quick over this because it's just in the report. I don't usually talk about this. I usually talk about the quality, the amount, the volume. ADF, a little breakdown of what they do to find out the acid detergent fiber. TDN, it's big in certain dairies. Really focus on this. R RFV, relative feed value. There are some brokers that look for this. And when they do, they'll bring it up and they'll highlight it why they got a little bit more for their hay. Different hay sampling ways. Here's again the quality designations. Okay, for grass is a little different. Grass don't usually have a high protein, so they tend to be on the lower side. So they have a different guideline or grades, you could say. So usually grass doesn't have supreme. It's just usually a premium. Some farmers don't test for hay, especially when they do retail. They don't need to. It's not going to go to dairy or exports. Usually goes to a feed store. So they use a visual to grade their hay. They usually look for coarse color, um, fine stem, extra leafy, pre-bloom, premium, early maturity, pre-bloom. Um, it's just what was I going to say? Premium tends to be the bulk of the hay market right now because it's really hard right now to get that supreme hay. Uh, the other thing too, when you have hay that's premium and you have grasses are premium, I think that's why it tends to take the bulk of all the trade. Good. Um, when it doesn't test right away, a farmer would tell me that it's clean and green, or they didn't test, or they did test it, but he said it didn't make test hay. So it usually means that when it fell into good or lower. Fair usually, fair quality usually has some defects, but not. It has some discoloration and tends to be your dry cow hay or grinder hay. Same thing with utility. You tend to have more defects in utility hay. Uh, Big coarse stem, a lot less leaf in there. Paragrass, um, it's usually a native grass that's found everywhere. Everybody has different names for their meadow grass, paragrass. Let's see what I got. Oh yeah, some of the factors. So there tends to be some defects in hay, and some of them are more than others. And when it's a whole lot and it discounts the price on, let's say, premium hay, there's defects like weeds. I'll mention it in the report that it's weedy, or it's been rained on, rain damage, It's dirty. Mm, there's bottom bales. I'll show why there's a discount in the hay. You'll have dusty hay, moldy hay. Heat damage is reported, but rarely. On my reports, it has been, but it's not a normal thing that gets reported. Usually more discoloration or bleach is reported. I usually ask for what cutting they're on. If they're on, first or second cutting, a lot of people like that second cutting or third. Um, Kind of eliminates all the weeds and defects in hay. And it also tends to test a little higher. Bales, I asked for the different type of what bale it's in. If it's a 2-string, 3-string, small squares, uh, large rounds, big bales, 3x4s, 4x4x8s. I'll also ask for the weights because you can have different classes of weights and just in large bales or large round bales. And sometimes when I get too many different weights, I'll just ask for tonnage. It's just a lot easier to report in tonnage versus bales. Once I gather all the information after calling them, um, I'll set up a sheet and per contact or operator, I'll start lining up what they reported. Um, so there's a difference between direct hay reporting and then live auction reporting. The direct hay is actually I'm talking to the growers, and the live auction, we're at the auction recording prices as they're going. Just one of our sheets that we use. I think this auction was in Pennsylvania. Yeah, this was in New Holland. The sheet on the right is our data information system where we enter our information for hay. These are one of the reporters out of Colorado. So our cooperators or the list of people that we talk to are growers, brokers, feed stores, producers, pretty much anyone in the industry, um, working in ag, or I should say hay market. In a new report, I want to go back to this one because it's important. Um, After we get their name, their phone number, depending on the state, like let's say, for instance, California, there are 6 regions. We got the Northern Intermountains, we got the Sacramento Valley, we have the North San Joaquin, we have Central San Joaquin, we have the South and Southeast. In Texas, we have the Panhandle, we have East, West, South, Central. And so when I'm going with it, every price, there's a different price for every region. And I try um, gathering all the trades in that region. So I have a more of an accurate price for that region. Sometimes the growers like hearing what's going on in other regions. So I'll let them know and I tell them what region or why they brought more than their region. And sometimes it has to do with because the dairies are closer to them, they tend to get a little higher price. And that's because of the freight. They don't have to pay as much. Okay, so here, these are all the things I collect. I collect the class of hay that we went over real quick. The quality, supreme, premium, good, fair, utility, the weight, tonnage. They report loads, and they sent 2, 3 loads. I know if it's 2 loads, 50, 75 tons, whatever it is, I know how many loads that usually brings in about 25 tons per load. Or 512 bales if they're reporting in bales. Same thing, price per unit, tonnage. There's special notes like it's it was baled dry or high moisture, or it had a high nitrate. I'll usually report all that, and I'll say why there's a discount or a premium sometimes for their hay. Some of the factors that affect the market is the weather. The weather has to do a lot with pricing. I say about, oh, like right now I was going through, I would say an abnormally dry conditions in the central Iowa. Um, Parts of eastern Iowa also is going through that. So the weather patterns have been uh, uh, different. Again, different for, I can't find a better word for it, but um, we've been getting, or they've been telling me they've been getting from half inch to 3 inches, depending on the area they're at, and they could be within half a mile, and everybody's getting different price. Everybody's getting different um, rain. Um, dairy, dairy markets. The dairy market. I'm not sure. Out on the West Coast, a lot of people use the the milk prices, and usually dairies use the milk prices to price their hay. And why? Because they usually tell their growers or the brokers that the price of milk has gone down, or if the price of milk is high, they won't mention that. But usually when it's low, they say they can't pay that much for hay, so they try to negotiate a price. Cattle market right now, everyone knows the cattle market's high. So depending on the region, um, with all this rain and some not, people not getting rain, people getting rain, there's not a whole lot of hay sales. The hills, the mountains are green, so no one's pretty much buying hay there. But in the areas where there's a lot, drought, there abnormal dry weather, that's where all the hay is selling right now. Local regional issues. They could be having not just water issues, but water restrictions, or they're trying to cut back on water. So this is the program or the data collection I was talking about earlier, where I enter all the information. If they're reporting hay, I go in hay. If it's silage, corn, usually I get corn silage, wheat silage, straw, usually rice, wheat. Usually only use conventional and organic. There are some organic hay being reported. The other two tabs, they're for other. It's a universal um, program, so I only use the organic and conventional. I'll put in that it's a trade for the day, or if they're just offering how much they're going to offer for it, or if a broker's asking or the grower's asking for that price or that type of bale, I'll put that in. If there's a contract that they winter out, they buy in the early spring and they'll deliver in the winter, I'll mention that's a contract trade or offer. I'm not sure what my cursor went. Oh yeah, FOB, freight on board, usually means it's going to be picked up at the farm, and delivery price means it's going to be delivered to wherever the buyer bought it. They want it delivered to their dairy or to their feedlot. I'll report tons. If they're reporting in tons, some guys like me reporting in their bales, especially retail. So I'll just however they want me to um, record, I'll fill it in. Sometimes it's per point. A lot of dairies out here in Colorado like buying by per point. Here are some of the regions I was talking about earlier. And I usually click on the region wherever that hay was being reported. Oh, class, the different types of mix mixes. Again, all these slides I'm showing, these are just screenshots of what I do and how I enter my data. All the type of package. Again, large squares, rounds, re small bales, the quality, supreme, premium, good. So I'll do this for every cooperator, every contact I call. I'll enter, and if they don't have nothing to report, I go on to the next. Here are some of the tags I can actually put on the report. If it's bale too dry, if it's bleached. I mean, sometimes there's a little bit of bleach, sometimes it's just real heavy, and I'll show why I brought a discount on even on a test hay that's premium, and because it was bleached, it probably brought $10, $15 less a ton, and I'll mention it there. They also like to know new crop, old crop prices, old crop last season, new crop, fresh stuff coming out this year. If I can, I'll try to ask where it's going, if it's going to a feedlot or a dairy, if it's going to export, if it's going to if it's selling for retail, dealer meal processor, if it's going to a processor, usually it's like gonna get pellet or cubed. These are some of the reports that are done. The Nebraska, that's the final product. And here are some useful links for the terms that we use in our reports. And we try to keep a universal language through all our reports. That way, um, the industry could stay with the same terminology. Uh, Throughout the country, we have a lot of ways that that have been tried to, or how can I put this? Well, some growers try to report to us that they have some real candy hay, and I can't put candy sweet hay on the report. So I have to ask, have you tested it? How does it look? What cutting is it? And little by little, I'll get them to know or let them know that I need to know the descriptions, not that it's just candy and the horses or the cattle they're feeding that love their hay. So that's why we have to use these terms throughout the country. So there's some of those terms in there. Um, let's do that. That's good there. This is a steamer out in Cedar, Utah. So we have training once a year. We try having two, but it's just sometimes just becomes really hard to get together. So there's a couple reporters throughout the US that covers different states. This is a auction in Iowa. And well, that's it. So if you have any questions, I know I kind of ran through it. I didn't think I was gonna go through it so fast, but Fred,
I'm gonna actually do two questions for you,
okay.
just because they're unique to what you're doing. You mentioned regions, Panhandle of Texas, and so in Iowa regions, or do you align the I-29 corridor, which includes South Dakota, Nebraska, Western Iowa? How would you make that a region, or do you make that a region, or is it strictly by states?
So it's by every state would have regions. Some states don't have a region only because there's so little of it being reported. And if we start putting in only northern Iowa's reporting so much. The guys from the south will know, oh, so and so is the only one that actually in that region. So um, we know who's reporting, and we try to keep all this is confidential. To we protect um, our contacts. We don't share, their information with other growers. The only thing we share is what you guys see in the public, the pricing per bale, volume, what region it's moving in. So not all states have regions, but some that do, we try to keep it, in that area. And when there isn't a region, we'll put NA. It's not available.
Very good. You'd mentioned exports or the export market. What, tell me how that plays into what you do.
So right now, I talked to four different exporters. Um, but there was seven. One went out of business out in the West Coast. But I usually talk to them. They send out to, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan. And when I hear all these deals, I start talking to them and ask them, what type of hay they look for. And it's usually test hay, and they tend to set the market even before the dairy comes in and starts buying. So usually can't say they're fighting for the same stack, but they definitely want to be competitive with the exporters.
Very good. Well, I'm sure there'll be more questions as we go through and have the Q&A. If you want to go ahead and close out your set of slide deck, I'll go ahead and share my slides.
Whoa.
And I'm going to see. Okay, can you tell me if you're seeing my slides or my note page? Anybody? Jorge?
Yep, Fred, we can see it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. When I started this, putting this presentation together, the title strategy for hay storage made a lot of sense. And then about 10 days ago, uh, we found that Iowa State Dairy had bought a load of hay in, uh, and a week later or 4 days later, we had a hay fire. We lost about $70,000 worth of hay. Uh, the rural department used firefighting foam, and we discovered that firefighting foam can be an EPA hazardous waste. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. Um, I've kind of narrowed it down. I want to talk about forage moisture and especially the plant microbial respiration, because those are the ones that, yeah, we've got some other moisture, but those are the ones that can create spoilage and fires. This really is important if we think about our typical losses, and this is averages, so I understand it's not what your field looks like, but we wind up with about 30% of the nutrients left. When you look at the field curing all the way through feeding, those are pretty significant losses. Now, if we look at optimum, where we're doing things right, we reverse that. We've got about 70% of the nutrients left. And look at the difference in the field curing and the feeding. A third of the loss that we have when we really pay attention to what's going on as we are cutting, as we're harvesting, how we store it, and then the feeding. I know this is an old screen, Dr. Hoagland. I like it though. I think there's some neat things that it has in it. Uh, the higher the moisture, the more we've increased in microbial uh, issues, and that's the thing that gives us problems. Bear with me. There we go. Now it's increased storage, most of the dry matter loss due to enhanced activity, heating, mold growth, and potential for combustion. At lower moisture, we're losing uh, nutrients because we've got increased shatter losses during baling, reduced overall dry matter, and potentially affecting protein and total digestible nutrients. Optimum between that 15–18% moisture. Larger bales require lower moisture, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Uh, Storage losses, the more moisture, the more microbial activity we have. That generates heat, that creates losses, those brown spots in the center of the bale, the mold and spoilage from that angle is not what animals like to eat. Plus, it degrades nutrient quality and can have the possibility of mycotoxins to the livestock. That big red spot in the center, the garbage zone, I really love that concept. You think about it as a combination of conditions that lead to significant dry matter loss and compromised forage quality. High moisture content coupled with unfavorable conditions like improper ventilation or direct ground contact creates an environment that's ripe for microbial growth and deterioration. Molds and bacteria thrive in warm, moist hay, and they consume variable nutrients and create the heat damage. Weathering is an issue when you're storing hay outside. Rain and other elements can deteriorate the quality, and especially when unprotected and sitting on the ground, moisture whips up and further increases losses. Now, the losses of the soluble carbohydrates and digestible nutrients that decline, reducing the value of the feed. Palatability, moldy or weathered hay, obviously livestock just don't like it as well. The two moistures we think about when we're putting hay up is stem moisture. It remains in the plant during the curing process unless you really give it ample time to field dry. Dew is what every kid who helped bale hay went out and would walk a windrow and grab a handful, twist it, see how it held the shape. The thing is, dew moisture rapidly goes away with sunlight or even the slightest breeze, only is a problem for a few hours. Standing forages contain an abundance of organisms like bacteria, yeast, and molds. The epiphyte is simply an organism that grows upon or is attached to a living plant, and those bacteria are common in all forages. Dry hay is typically baled at low moisture, and aerobic bacteria are unable to survive. When hay is baled too wet, or conversely, when forages are ensiled too dry, a pseudo-fermentation environment exists The forage contains adequate moisture for aerobic bacteria to grow, but excessive oxygen is trapped within the forage mass, and that extends this aerobic phase over several days or even several weeks. Normal heating is called sweating in baled hay. It's a natural process where hay heats up due to the microbial and plant respiration after baling. This heating is typically harmless with temperatures reaching 100 to 130 degrees, but it's especially troublesome in hay baled at higher moisture levels. And it's critical to monitor the hay temperatures, especially those first few weeks after baling. Pay attention if you see consistent temperatures exceeding 130. That could be an indication of problems. These secondary heating is caused by activity of the heat-loving bacteria. The hay's temperature and moistures are high enough. Temperatures exceeding 130 and sufficient moisture make these bacteria become very active. The dangerous temperatures, when you're probing, at 170, you have fire danger, the potential. When you go 180 to 220, this is the critical plateau where moisture evaporates rapidly, making the hay more flammable. And above that, 220, 240, you have the potential for ignition or combustion. When you stand back and look at the hay in warm, humid conditions, I've seen wisps of water vapor coming off a pile. You get closer and you can smell that vinegar-like odor. And when you get close enough and they actually have combustion, you smell it pretty quick. It's pungent and it smells hot. Okay, this exothermic heating is what we're really talking about uh, when hay is stored wet. And I keep bringing up the moisture because it is what determines the potential for nutrient loss and combustion. Um, these bacteria and even the hay itself continue to respire, breaking down sugars and releasing energy as heat. Hay bales, especially large, both rounds and squares, act as insulation, trapping this heat within the bale of the stack. So as the temperatures rise, it doesn't have anywhere to go. It keeps getting hotter, and that's the issue when you start seeing these temperatures over 250 all the way up to 4 or 450. That's creating flammable gases that can ignite and lead to this spontaneous combustion and fire. This is just kind of a rule of thumb. When you're looking at small bales, you really want to keep them at that 15 to 18%. At 22, you're bumping that edge and can create problems. Large rounds, you want to stay in that 16, 17%. And the large squares, you want to keep them below that 15%. Heat damaged hay often has a sweet or tobacco-like smell in a brown or caramel color. While it may be palatable to livestock, it provides less usable nutrition. At temperatures above 170 degrees, the Maillard reaction occurs where proteins and sugars bind, making the protein unavailable for digestion by ruminants. Many nutritionists hold the view that NDF digestibility is reduced as a result of spontaneous heating. Surprisingly, Results from studies suggest that NDF digestibility is not significantly altered by heating unless the heating is severe enough to cause the charring of the black and brown pockets within the bale core. Concentrations of NDF often increase by as much as 11% as a result of spontaneous heating. It's important to note that it's not generating NDF during the heating process. The increases occur because cell solubles, specifically the sugars, are oxidized preferentially during the microbial respiration. Fiber components such as NDF, ADF, and lignin are generally inert during this process, but their concentrations appear to increase because the solubles are reduced due to oxidation. This is particularly important because sugars and other cell solubles are essentially 100% digestible. When we go to store these bales, this keeping the quality starts before we even make the bale. We want to monitor the hay moisture when we're raking and tedding. The first bales, we really want to move away from that, oh, it feels dry, to testing with an electronic moisture probe. That's specific, it doesn't take long, and it gives you positive information. If we get some high moisture bales, we don't want to put them on the main pile, whether we're taking a low spot in the field or a different field. Set them off until they've sweated out and cured. We want to avoid mixing different lots of hay. And of course, we want to keep hay covered, both lead sides and tops. We want to protect hay from external weather and water. It's something we've learned the hard way. We want to elevate the base, whether we're using pallets or railroad ties. And then the best insurance we can do is to cut guttering that'll direct the water flow away from the haystack. Just kind of changed my program because of the fire there at the Iowa State hay barn. Firefighting foam used to extinguish hay can cause extensive nutrition damage to the hay, especially if it's one of the older foams, the PFAS foams. They are called forever chemicals because they persist in the environment and accumulate in the body. Health concerns for cows, especially as it accumulates in the liver. It also can accumulate in the kidney and in the reproductive organs. And if it's transferred and found in the milk, that milk cannot be sold, and it cannot be sold or fed to other animals. Decision making for farmers, if you have hay fire and they use foam, get the hay tested, figure out exactly what's in it. Even before that, sit down with your rural fire department, find out what kind of foam they actually carry on the trucks, and ask them to consider a fluorine-free foam. They're considered a much safer alternative. Here in Iowa, we have access to a soy-based foam called soy foam, and it's an example of a safe alternative for foaming the fires in a hay barn. We discovered real quick that if you have high PFAS, you are not going to be able to dispose that hay very easily. Obviously, you can't feed it. You can't burn it, you can't spread it on the field because it becomes an EPA hazardous material. So it's best to not have the situation where you got to figure out what to do with it. That is my slides. My contact information is there if you have questions. I will go ahead and get out of this, and we will turn it over to our listeners. Go ahead and just open up your mics and ask questions. I'm looking at the chat box. I'm not seeing any questions. Dale, I suspect that you are going to kick off the Q&A for us. What question do you have?
Uh, isn't there some way that fire departments can be prevented from, are they not aware of what they're creating when they use that foam?
They're aware of it, but the reality of it is that's not their major fires that they fight. That's why it's up to us as livestock producers to make sure they're aware that there's an alternative there. If they use foam, uh, for instance, I was on the fire department in Southwest Missouri, and we would foam these $1 million homes in the Mark Twain forest. Well, once the fire went through and you hit it with water and it went away, no one tended to say anything. I
Mhm.
think they're a little stricter now, but this putting it on feed, that's something we as producers have to take the first step.
I'm just surprised that a fire department hasn't been sued, um, even by EPA. I'm just really surprised at that.
Dr. Martinson, have you heard of any legal action again? I have not heard.
Hmm. Well, you guys might create legal action. Who knows?
Well, it it was embarrassing when, that morning we had four TV stations there on the dairy, and they're pretty bold people. They don't necessarily stop when you tell them stop. They wanted the picture. So
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Um, I was um, really intrigued by the ash content that Miss Martinson had on her, Dr. Martinson. I missed the first introduction, so I'm not sure I got that right. But anyway, intrigued by that. Um, I remember when one of our first Dutch farmers came here, he hired a guy to come and harvest his alfalfa, or maybe it was sorghum Sudan. I can't remember. But anyway, it was a self-propelled forage chopper or cutter, really, windrower, and the rear wheel drove over the windrow. And I'm thinking, well, that ought to create a little bit of extra ash, pushing it down into the dirt and the mud and stuff like that. Uh, I hear people being much more concerned about that contaminant, if you will, than they used to be, and taking steps to try to avoid that. And the research that you guys have done, it shows the differences is really, really helpful.
Oh, thank you, Dale. That is great to hear. I shared a link in the chat, and we also have a YouTube video. Um, with all of our research, once it is published, we post it on our website and usually have a YouTube video that accompanies it. But Dale, I agree. There's a lot more interest in ash content. I think it is just reflective that people are pushing forage harder, pushing cattle harder,
Hmm.
right? Everything is. I mean, it's so expensive to farm, right? And I think this is just something that we're aware of. And sometimes you have the equipment to help, and sometimes you kind of you have the wheel rake, and so you just have to really focus on adjusting it to try to limit that amount. And of course, up here in Minnesota, we're the home of the gophers, including
Yeah,
the ones
yeah,
that actually cause problems. So it's just something that we've just become more aware of. I
yeah.
would
Do you find it is different years are different? We follow the Dairyland testing or have him present at the end of the year. And we always talk about ash. Some years, man, it's not an issue. A couple of years ago, man, it was 2% higher than it had been previous years. Do you find that up there?
Fred, I haven't followed the ash content. I follow a couple of the hay tested auctions just to kind of keep my thumb on the prices of things. But honestly, if you think about it, in drought years, it's probably higher just because things are looser, right? And kind of there's less forage material, so you have more ground, more interaction with the ground. The sand is looser. Where a year like this, at least in Minnesota, where it's so wet, it's just harder to kick up. It's just harder to kick up soil right when it's wet. So, although I have like, no scientific data to support that, I would assume that the amount of rain you have is also going to impact the ash content.
Jorge, do you find different areas of the country talk about ash more than others?
To to be honest, this is the first time I'm hearing about the ash content, and the only here that you hear about ash is the actual, you know, potash, actual fertilizer, not in feed. So
And Jorge, that doesn't surprise me because I work primarily with horse owners, and horse owners tend to feed small square bales and in feeders. And when you have a lot of ash and hay and you go out there and you can scoop up, sand and soil particles in your feeders, it becomes very present. And you know, horse, sometimes horses can be real hard to keep alive. And a lot of sand in the digestive tract of any animals, but especially horses, there's just a heightened awareness, I think, in the horse market. So unless a lot of your hay is going to the horse market, it's not surprising that it might not be on their radar.
So we've got a couple of producers, forage growers on the program, and others will be listening on the archive. Is there a couple of things you think we have to drive home if they're going to sell to the horse market that they need to be aware of?
Oh, Fred, the $1 million question. Jorge, do you want to give that a shot? I have a few key thoughts, but I'll let you speak first.
again, this is the first time I'm hearing about the ash part of it. I'm not the expert on it, but I never heard of, you know,
Oh, Jorge, just selling to the horse and selling hay to the horse market in general. Ash aside, just general things about selling hay to the horse market.
what about that? What
Do you
about
have any tips or tricks that you would pass on to people?
no, I mean usually horse people have their ways, what they want. You're not going to tell, a customer this is what you have to buy. That they're going to get what they want. That's not
Mhm.
um it's not an argument you're going to win or make. It's just the customer's always right. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's fair. Fred, I think if you are going to sell, um, my family sold hay into the horse market for years. And the biggest thing is kind of a constant education thing. So a lot of hay suppliers that are selling into the horse market, I think, have to have patience and do education. Um, there's just a lot of misconceptions. You can't feed horses first cutting. Alfalfa will kill a horse. Propionic acid is bad for horses, even though it's produced in their GI tract. And, there's all of this data that supports that can really counteract a lot of these rumors and wives' tales that exist in the horse market. And we try really hard at the University of Minnesota to put good information out there. But a lot of it is honestly correcting misconceptions and doing research around, topics. One of the reasons we did the round bale and moisture is that horse owners were telling me you could never make a dry round bale. Well, I know that. I mean, that's not true. You just have to be really careful about the moisture compared to a small square. So a lot of it is just education, and doing that applied research and just being patient and really working with those good hay clients and keeping them long term and trying to work to correct some of those misconceptions. But like Jorge said, the customers, right? They're really good people. They care a lot about their horses. They are horse people and not hay people. So it's just a lot of education needed when you're selling into the horse market, is what I have found.
Well, we've got just a few more minutes left. Jorge, want to spend a minute or two looking into your crystal ball. What are we going to see in this hay market? If export comes on with a bang, it'll go up. If it doesn't, what are we going to see in the next 4 months?
Yeah, I don't have that crystal ball, and if I did, I probably wouldn't be doing this. What I can tell you is what the market's doing currently and all the different factors involved. And then, you could tell me if you're going to be in it, you're going to be buying, or you're going to stay out of it. But right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. The market just opened up again in the West Coast, so there is some buying, not a whole lot of buying, and there is a lot of hay, a lot of haystacks, the ditch banks right now. A lot of carryover from last year, and I'm not just talking the West Coast. I'm talking from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, um, parts of Nevada. Surprisingly, Utah is actually doing good, but only their test hay is actually moving. You come into Colorado, Colorado's having, they have a lot of hay too out here. There's a lot of hay stacking up. Um, the weather, I mean, this weather has just been, it's good and it's bad. And you're getting the rain when you shouldn't be getting the rain. And, you have some drought, but there again, as soon as it rains, it comes out of drought, but then they haze up. It's wet. So now you have, less quality. The cost of production is up. So to say, um, I'd say the prices um, would stay moderate to steady.
Okay.
I wouldn't.
We have a kind of a small group here, so if any of the folks have a question, just unmute and go ahead and share the questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any action. Dr. Martinson, Jorge, I appreciate you spending the time with us, presenting some very interesting information, very useful information. And we hope that you will come back in the future and join us. This is an every month webinar. So folks, you will be getting a notice from us that lets you know where it's archived. And then we will ask you to do a short evaluation, tell us what we can do better. And it'll also announce next month's speakers. So at this point, thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you to our listeners, and I will close it down.